My name's Linda and I'm a tour guide here with Mercat Tours, and we're currently standing directly below Blair Street. This corridor is what takes us through now to our first stop on our tours. This double height room is absolutely huge and cavernous, and what I always ask people to do on the tours is to just listen. Because you can't hear any of the buses, the trucks, the lorries thundering above us. We're 40 feet directly below Southbridge, and yet you can't hear any of it. It's incredible. And the vaults here are directly below the bridge. This vault and the next one that we go through the archway to, that's the width of the bridge. It's about 56 feet, 18 metres. And look at this. One of the reasons that these vaults were abandoned, started to be abandoned within the first decade after they opened in 1788. Have a look at this. This looks like candle wax. Oh, it's not candle wax though. It's water dripping in from above. And the reason for that is when the bridge was constructed, what should have been used is something called puddling clay. Acts like a sponge. They didn't use it. And instead water is able to course through the bricks here, the stone, leaving this place very, very damp, not really fit for human habitation. The next vault over, this is the tavern. And we know it was a tavern because of what we found here. If you have a look at the floor, there are little bits of black glass. That tells us that it was bottles of claret, Scotland's favourite drink when these vaults opened, imported by the shipload from France, from the Bordeaux region in southwest France. But there were other things found here as well. In this corner, oyster shells, piles of oyster shells. And that tells us that people here would eat oysters by the bucket load, literally by the bucket load. You could buy 100 oysters for the equivalent today of £6. And that's because out in the Firth of Forth, there were 50 square miles of oyster beds. And in 1790 alone, that produced 30 million oysters for everybody here to eat. Man, woman, child, rich and poor, young and old. The corridor that we're now in is directly below Niddry Street. That's on the opposite side of Southbridge from Blair Street. And this would have connected a lot of these vaults off to one side. We'd just come through from the tavern. And this is where people would come and go. Over here, that was the entrance, how you got in and out from Niddry Street. Very old, and the very first person we are aware of who left these vaults because they were too damp was a jeweller called James Henderson. We know that because we have his door in our reception. 1796, only 8 years after these vaults were opened, he was the first to leave because the conditions were so bad. This is a wine vault. It would have been the same on both sides. You can clearly see compartments here, but if you look over at the other side, that has long since fallen away, presumably because of the dampness down here. And this is where those bottles of claret from France would have been stored. They would have been laid down on a bed of sawdust and then arranged in a pyramid shape with bits of straw in between the bottles to protect them. This is the caretaker's room. This would have been where somebody would have stayed while they were looking after the goods that were stored here. But we also know that poor families eventually crowded in to spaces like this. There's a fire that leads directly into the chimney stack of Blair Street above us. So that would have provided warmth. It would have been something you could use for cooking things on. And over in the corner here, that in Scots we would call that a midden. It's a rubbish heap. And in that we found oyster shells, animal bones, but we also found a really beautiful wee toy. It was a glass pistol, about 4 inches long, obviously beloved toy of somebody, and it survived, and we have it upstairs in our discovery room. We're now at the entrance to the White Room, one of the smaller of the vaults down here. And if you look closely, just where my fingers are, you can see in there embedded is an oyster shell. And that's because people, back when these were created, they were really superstitious. And the belief was that oyster shells would protect you against evil spirits, against witches. Because legend has it that witches couldn't cross over anything that had been in running water. They couldn't cross running water. And that's why an oyster shell is there, because that, of course, has been in running water. So there's lots to explore in our vaults.